She had been ready for 3 years, which was how long it had taken her to save enough, and she knew she was ready because she had been keeping the ledger and the ledger said so. The ledger was small and leather-bound and fit in the inside pocket of her good coat, and it had an entry for every week of the 3 years, what she had earned, what she had spent, what remained. And by the August of 1883 the remaining column had the number she needed, and the county had posted the auction notice for the Callaway claim for the second Tuesday in October, which was next week, which was when she was going to go buy her land back. Owen had died in the winter of 1880. He had died of pneumonia in February at 41, which was sudden enough and early enough that she had spent the first months afterward primarily in the work of absorbing the fact of it rather than managing its consequences, and the consequences had therefore arrived somewhat later and harder than they might have if she had been attending to them. She had found the promissory note in March among Owen's papers, folded inside a copy of a Missouri land deed she had not known existed. It was for $1,100, signed in 1873, before they came west, before the Colorado claim, before most of what she thought of as their life, a note on a business partnership that had failed and whose remaining debt had been renegotiated twice and which was now, Owen being dead, fully due. She had not known about the note. This was a fact she had taken some time to understand in its full dimensions. Not that Owen had hidden it from her, exactly, but that he had managed it as a thing that was going to resolve itself eventually and had not resolved itself and had instead arrived at her door in April of 1880 as a demand from a creditor in Missouri who was represented by a lawyer in Denver who was very precise about what was owed and when. She had paid what she could. It had not been enough. The 160-acre claim on the South Road had gone to auction in the fall of 1880 to cover the balance. She had stood in the back of the county clerk's office and watched it go. She had stood there because she needed to see it happen, to watch the land become someone else's in the specific legal way so that she understood what had occurred and what she was going to have to undo. The room was mostly men, county regulars, a few speculators from Denver, the people who came to these things. The Callaway claim opened at $400, which was low for 160 acres of South Road land with a house and a functioning well, and she had understood that the low opening was because everyone in the room knew about Owen's debt and had calculated accordingly. It climbed. At $750, most of the room was out. At $800, there were 2 bidders left. And then Garrett Aldgate, who had said nothing until that moment, bid $820 and the gavel came down and the land was his. She had gone home. She had made a list. She had kept the list. His name was Garrett Aldgate, and he owned the adjacent property and 3 other claims in the county. He was not the highest bidder. There had been a moment between the opening bid and the close where the bidding stalled, and she had thought for a moment that perhaps it would go unsold, and then Garrett had bid and the gavel had come down and the claim was his. She had gone home that evening and made a list of what she had and what she could do and what she was going to do, and the doing of it had taken 3 years, but the list had been right. Garrett Aldgate owned the adjacent property and 3 other claims in the county, all of them acquired over the 12 years he had been in the territory. He was known in Harmon Creek as a fair man who watched things carefully before doing them, which was accurate. He was not known as a charitable man. His business dealings were even and accurate, and allowed for no sentiment, which was also accurate. He was not, as far as anyone could tell, a man who made decisions for other people. He was the kind of man who made decisions for himself and let other people make theirs. This was Nora's understanding of him, which was based on 4 years of county-level observation and 3 years of watching him farm her north pasture from a borrowed horse on the South Road in October. Now it was Saturday, 4 days before the auction, and someone knocked at her door. She opened it, and it was Garrett. She said, "Mr. Aldgate." He said, "Mrs. Callaway." He was in his working clothes, which she noted, and he was holding his hat in both hands in front of him rather than wearing it, which she also noted, because it was cold enough outside to warrant a hat. He said, "I came to tell you I intend to bid at Tuesday's auction." She said, "I know." She said, "I intend to outbid you." He said, "I thought you might. I'll need to know your ceiling." She said, "You won't." He said, "Mrs. Callaway." She said, "I'm not going to tell you my ceiling, Mr. Aldgate. You'll find out Tuesday." He looked at her for a moment. The dark gray eyes that watched things the way the eyes of someone watch who has learned that watching is more reliable than acting. He said, "I'm not going to the auction," she said. "I beg your pardon." He said it again. He said, "I'm not going to the auction." He said, "I thought I should tell you before Tuesday so you understood what was going to happen and didn't bid against yourself." She said, "Why aren't you going to the auction?" He said, "Because the land isn't mine." She said, "It is yours. You bought it." He said, "I bought it to keep it." She said, "That's the same thing." He said, "No, it isn't," he told her. He had been in the county room in 1880 when the Callaway claim was auctioned, and she had been there too, in the back, standing against the wall, and he had watched her face during the bidding. He had watched her watch the land go, and what he had seen in her face was not grief, which he had expected, but the specific expression of someone who was not finished with a thing yet. He said, "I knew you were going to come back for it," she said. "You couldn't have known that." He said, "I was reasonably certain." He said, "I bought the claim because if I didn't buy it, a speculator from Denver would, and if a speculator from Denver bought it, the house would be stripped and the soil run hard and the well neglected, and when you came back for it there would be nothing worth coming back for." A pause. He said, "I've been keeping it." She said, "Keeping it." He said, "The house is intact. The south pasture is maintained. The well is clean. The north pasture I've farmed. I hope you don't object. Land shouldn't sit idle," she said, "for 3 years. He said, "Yes." She said, "Why didn't you tell me?" He said, "I thought about it." He said, "I decided not to." She said, "Why?" He said, "Because if I told you, it would have been different." She looked at him on her doorstep with his hat in his hands, and she thought about 3 years. Not abstractly, concretely. The specific texture of 3 years. The first winter when she had rented a room from Mrs. Fletcher and taken every sewing job she could find and had eaten simply, and had opened the ledger every Sunday to enter the week's numbers and add the running total, which was small at first and grew slowly and then faster as she became better at the work and had more of it. She thought about the women's quarterly sewing circle she had joined in the second year because it brought her customers and also because she needed something besides the work and the ledger. She thought about the specific October morning of the second year when she had ridden out on a borrowed horse and looked at the south pasture from the road, her old fence line, the house visible in the distance, the north pasture being worked, and had turned the horse back toward town with the specific determination of someone who is not going to do anything until they are ready and who is not ready yet. 3 years. And this man on her doorstep was telling her he had made a decision about those 3 years on her behalf. She thought about what the 3 years had made of her, which was considerable. She was not the same woman who had stood in the back of the county room in 1880 and watched the gavel come down. That woman had a list. This woman had filled the list and was standing on the other side of it, ready for Tuesday. She would not have traded what the 3 years had made of her. She also understood that no one had the right to decide what she needed without asking her, even if what they decided was correct. She said, "You had no right to make that decision for me." He said, "No." He said, "I didn't." She said, "You decided what I needed without asking." He said, "Yes." She said, "And if I hadn't saved enough, if 3 years hadn't been enough," he said, "I had decided to wait as long as it took." She said, "And if I'd given up?" He said, "I didn't think you would." She said, "That's not an answer." He said, "No." He said, "You're right." A pause. He said, "I watched you at that auction in 1880 and I thought, that woman is going to come back for this. And I thought, when she does, she should be able to come back for something worth having. And I thought, the only way she'll know she's ready is if she earns it." He said, "That was my reasoning." "You can tell me it was wrong." She said, "It was presumptuous." He said, "Yes." She said, "It was your decision to make, not mine." He said, "Yes." He said, "I'm sorry the waiting was hard." She said, "Are you sorry you waited?" He was quiet for a moment. He said, "I'm sorry for any of it that was wrong. I'm not sorry for what it made of you." She said, "You don't know what it made of me." He said, "You're standing at your door telling a man twice your size that he had no right to do something he did in your interest. That's part of what it made of you." She said, "I would have been capable of that before." He said, I think you would have, he said. I think the 3 years taught you that you would. She was quiet for a moment. She said, That's a very fine line. He said, Yes. He said, It is. She bought the land on Tuesday. The opening bid was from a Denver speculator who dropped out in the second round when she held. The third round was hers. She stood in the county clerk's office and signed her name and took the deed and stood with it in her hands for a moment. The specific weight of a document that is also 3 years of something harder than money. And then she folded it and put it in her coat beside the ledger. She drove out to the property on Wednesday morning, the deed in her coat pocket beside the ledger. She went through the gate, her gate now, legally, again, and she walked the land. The house was in better condition than she had allowed herself to imagine. The roof had been patched in 2 places she hadn't expected, which meant recently. The windows were intact. The door hung properly. She went through each room slowly, noting things. The hearth cleaned and functional. The kitchen floor replaced in one corner where the boards had been soft. The bedroom windows reglazed, things that had been tended. Things that someone had been tending for 3 years because they expected someone to come back to them. She stood in the kitchen for a while. She thought about Owen, who had built this house and cooked at this hearth, and whose debt had taken it. She thought about him plainly, the way she had been thinking about him for 3 years, not with grief anymore, which had finished in its acute phase sometime in the 2nd year, but with the specific complicated clarity of someone who has had time to understand a person accurately and has arrived at a picture that is both more honest and more forgiving than the picture available in the immediate aftermath of loss. She walked the south pasture and the north pasture and checked the well and looked at the soil. The north pasture was in better shape than Owen had left it, which she had expected from the look of it when she had ridden past on the borrowed horse in the 2nd year, and which she noted without saying anything because there was no one to say it to. She stood at the south fence in the October afternoon and looked at the mountains and thought about the fine line Garrett had described, between a decision made for someone's benefit and a decision made on someone's behalf, and she thought about whether it was a fine line or a wide one, and she thought that the answer depended on whether you were the one the decision was made about, and that from where she was standing at the south fence of her own land, the line felt wide. She also thought about what 3 years had made of her, and she thought that he was right about that, and she did not want to be in the position of being right and wrong about the same person simultaneously, which she was, and which was going to require some time to sort out. She drove to his property that afternoon. She knocked at his door. He opened it immediately, which meant he had been expecting her, which she noted. She said, "The land is mine." He said, "I know." She said, "The south barn door needs a new hinge." He said, "I know. I was going to see to it this week." She said, "Don't." He said, "All right." She said, "I'll see to it." He said, "All right." She looked at him. She said, "You could come to supper on Thursday." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "All right." She said, "I'm going to be angry about this for a while longer." He said, "I know." She said, "And then I'm going to stop being angry." He said, "I know that too." She said, "How do you know?" He said, "Because you came here." She stood at his door for a moment. She said, "Thursday." She went back to her wagon. She drove home to her land. She fixed the barn door hinge herself that evening. It took her 40 minutes and she did it correctly the first time. And when she was done, she stood in the barn doorway in the October dark and looked at the south pasture she had walked that morning and thought about a ledger entry that said, "Enough." She had had enough for 6 months before the auction. She had kept saving anyway because she had not been ready, and now she was. And the door swung true on its new hinge, and Thursday was coming. He came for supper on Thursday at the hour she had specified, which she noted because it was exactly the hour. She had cooked for 2, which she had not done in 3 years, and she did not mention this and he did not mention it, and they ate with the practical ease of people who have gotten past the part that required difficulty and are now in the part that doesn't. After supper, she put the ledger on the table. She said, "You can look at it." He picked it up. He turned the pages from January of 1881 forward, every week marked, every entry in the same careful hand, the running total column on the right going up in small increments and then larger ones. He did not say anything while he read it. He read all 3 years. He said, "You had enough 6 months ago." She said, "Yes." He said, "You kept saving anyway." She said, "I wasn't ready." He set the ledger down. He said, "What were you waiting for?" She said, "To feel like the land was going to be mine, not just something I had the money to buy." He said, "What changed?" She thought about it. She said, "I fixed the barn door hinge this week." He said, "I know, I saw it." She said, "You came by?" He said, "I drove past." The door was swinging correctly. She said, "Yes." She said, "I knew I was ready when I fixed the hinge." He said, "Not before?" She said, "I had to fix something myself." He nodded. He understood, which she could see in his face, and she thought that was one of the things about this man that was going to complicate the anger she had decided to keep for a while longer. She closed the ledger. She put it on the shelf beside the land deed, which was where it was going to stay, the record of the work beside the result of it. Outside the window, the October evening was settling on the south pasture, which was hers, which she had walked with her own feet 2 days before and which she was going to keep walking for as long as she was on this earth. He was at her table finishing his supper. She was going to be angry at him for a while, and then she was going to stop. She thought Thursday might become a regular occurrence. She thought she was going to be all right with that.